Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We are so glad to have you, whether you're watching online or you're in the room. This is the largest service we've had since March. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. So we are growing services as we're allowed to within our community, and thank you so much to those of you who have volunteered this weekend and last weekend to help make that possible. And whether you know it or not, those of you who may feel convicted to do some serving in the future after we talk today. We are so glad, though, that you're here. Everybody have all their fingers and toes from last night? We're good? Anybody missing any? Hopefully you'd be getting medical attention. But glad you're here. There were a lot of fireworks last night, even though I think we weren't supposed to have any of them, but it's fine. 2020. Glad you're here. We started a series last week called One Another and talked about the fact that it feels like there's a lot going on in our world that we can't control, a lot that's out of control. But there are some things we actually do have a part of. There are some things we can do something about. And Jesus talked to us last week about this idea that when we love one another, a watching world actually sees the way we love one another as followers of Jesus and sees that this love God has for us is real. And maybe, just maybe, that same love might be for them too. So today we're going to talk about one of the ways we love one another, which is by serving one another. And if you've never been here before, never heard me speak, I pray kneeling. And the reason that I do that is because there's this thing that we want to align our hearts with, where we humble ourselves before God and we remind ourselves that He's in control. And times like this, it's easy to remember that we're not. But if you would, just wherever you are, in the quiet of your own space, in your own heart, would you humble yourself with me before God and ask Him to speak to you right now? God, thank you for the fact that so much of what we experience today feels out of control, but we know you are in control. Would you give us fresh perspective today about how serving one another is something you actually made us to do? It's a purpose for why we exist. Would you wake up some things inside of us, God, that maybe we have let go dormant, some priorities or issues that maybe we just haven't thought about for a long time, but you're going to challenge us based on how you've gifted us to do something about it today. In Jesus' name. Amen. So on the chat, Dustin and Lisa asked you just a few minutes ago, what are you most excited to open back up? We know that right now there are parts of our country that are actually closing back down, which is really difficult to watch. And we're thankful right here in Colorado that things are still kind of in that phase of opening back up. Feels like we're doing our part, keeping things under control. For our family, one of the things that we're really excited about is Disneyland. So we have a trip that was planned for this upcoming December, and I have a little girl for sure who is really hoping that Disneyland is open back up by then. I'm not sure California is going to be opened up back by then, but we'll keep that between you and me. Some of you answered on the chat what you're excited to have open back up. Sherry, on the app, she said traveling to Mexico. The Arguellos, I'm probably saying that wrong, on Church Online said, I can't wait to go swimming when the pools open up again. Some of them are opening up and they're not crowded, so that's a win if you can get a reservation. On YouTube, David said, I'm looking forward to going mask-free and seeing all these beautiful smiling faces. It is interesting, right? We don't know what other faces look like. There are some other people that are excited about that with you, David. On Facebook, Leslie said, we're ready for baseball games and the movie theaters to open up. That sounds fun, doesn't it? Or basketball games, I think. No baseball games. So I think all of us have things that right now we are looking forward to either being back open or being open in a way that feels like what it felt like before all of this. And I think that, we can all connect to and think about and appreciate those things. I think one of the things, if we're not careful, we actually have the ability to open some stuff up in our own life, in our own heart. And we're going to talk about one of those things today, because if you've been personally shutting things down, maybe it's been easy over the course of the last few months to just kind of hide, whether you've just been staying at home or maybe even relationally you've been isolating, and you've thought to yourself, I'll wait to do something, I'll wait to show up, I'll wait to engage until things are back to normal. Here's what I'll tell you. It's time to open for service. And that's not a restaurant, that's not a business, that's you and me. We were made to serve, and we're going to talk about why that is so incredibly important over the next few minutes together as we think about serving one another. I know that for lots of you, you wonder, okay, so how do I serve? And maybe even right now, why would I serve? Why wouldn't we just wait a little bit until it feels like things are safe or safer or better? And I'll start with this reason. Number one, love serves. Love serves. This idea of what it means for you and me to apply what we learned from Jesus last week, that we would love one another. One of the ways that we do that is we serve one another. We care for one another. We do things practically and specifically to make a difference in the lives of one another. So before we get to that, I want to ask you one question to answer in the chat wherever you're watching. Describe the best party you've ever been to. Describe the best party you've ever been to. And if you are a student or a child and you're watching this with a parent who has recently gone through a lot of trouble to throw you a birthday party, the correct answer is that party, okay? I just want to give you that quick tip. So here's the thing. We're going to look at Romans again. We've looked at Romans 12 and 13 3 times in the last 4 weeks. And if you haven't been with us, Romans is written by this guy, the Apostle Paul, a church leader in the first century. God radically changed and saved his life. And in the midst of that, he spends 11 chapters writing about the love of God for you and me, and the difficulty, really the impossibility of us getting to God on our own. But the love of God is that he would send his son Jesus on your and my behalf to die in our place so that we can have a relationship with him. And then beginning in chapter 12, he talks about the contrast of how we respond, not so that God would love us, not so that God would accept us, but because through Jesus, he already has offered acceptance, has already offered relationship, and offers love. And so with all that in mind, we look in some of those first few verses, and Paul talks about these specific spiritual gifts. And maybe you don't know this, but if you're a follower of Jesus, you have the Spirit of God living inside of you. We just sang about it, right? This resurrection power is in my veins. I have the Spirit of God living inside of me. And with that, spiritual gifts that God has given every follower of Jesus that are unique and specific, not only to how God made you, but also to what the community of followers of Jesus around you needs. That as we all together work to serve one another, gifted by God, he has perfectly built us to do that very thing. And so he gives us some pictures of what it means to walk that out in Romans 12. He says it this way. He says, let love be genuine and abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints, and seek to show hospitality. Paul wants to remind us of a few really important things that I think we actually need reminding of today. The first thing that he wants to remind you and me is that our love needs to be genuine, right? We need to have an honest expression of love for people in our life. It is easy, especially if you've been a Christian for a little while, to think, I'll just go through the motions. I'll do the stuff that I know I need to do in serving one another, but it's not really honest. It's not really authentic. It's not really describing what's going on the inside. And Paul says the kind of love that I want you to extend is a selfless, genuine love. And even though it's easy in our cultural moment, and I would argue every cultural moment, to say, I'm gonna dabble a little bit in some of this really not so great stuff happening in the world right now. I'm gonna get into all of it in a really unhealthy, unhelpful way. What Paul says is that while we should make sure our love is honest, we should actually hate. And this idea that there are things propagated in our world and in our moment where people could hate others, where people could seek to divide, where people would let inequity continue without anything or without ever addressing it, Paul says that is not love. As a matter of fact, he goes on to talk about the fact that this love and the way we show it to one another, it's like a family relationship. And so he communicates this kind of over and over again in his writings. As a matter of fact, a few months ago, we studied a letter to the church at Ephesians that Paul wrote, and he talks about this family relationship, that we're actually one body with many different members of that body, all uniquely gifted to make a difference. And the way that we serve one another is actually the way we also serve Jesus. And the way he describes this is this phrase. He says that we should be outdoing one another in showing honor. Now, this is so countercultural, isn't it? Because for the most part, we want to be outdone and other people showing us honor. And so the hope that we see here is that you and we could not have to be worried about serving ourselves because so many people are serving. We're all serving one another. We're all outdoing one another in honor. We can trust the community that we're a part of. And so maybe for you this is hard. It's hard to know what this looks like or feels like. And I don't know every relationship in your life. I know for me, my marriage is a very clear mirror of whether or not I'm doing this okay or not. And so just a few weeks ago, we had a really busy weekend, talked about some heavy stuff, and then that next week, I had something literally every day, all day, and every night of that week. And so I was basically sleeping at home, and Alyssa was taking care of so much at home with the kids and life, and I was so tremendously thankful. And I remember the next weekend, I was looking at the calendar for the following week, and I saw 2 nights where she was out with friends, and I just say, "What's this?" And she said, I just need some time. These are some nights that I'm gonna have. And it was totally okay. I was glad that she did it. But in that moment, I realized I was not, she was serving me and serving our family incredibly well, but I was not proactively thinking about and serving her in that time. I was not outdoing one another and showing honor. I was just coasting for a while. I was running so fast. I was more interested in what I needed and what I had to get done than I was what she needed. And it's so easy for all of us to get to that place. Maybe for you, it's your spouse. Maybe it's your child. Maybe it's your parents. Maybe it's your siblings. Maybe it's neighbors. Maybe it's coworkers, peers, and teammates. Who are the people in your life that you are right now thinking, I am definitely more interested, if I'm honest at my heart level, with them serving me than I am with serving them? What can you do right now in 2020 to serve others? He finishes the section by showing this connection between serving and hospitality. And that's a really important connection. Now, I want to stop some of you because some of you are like, I'm just not like a big hospitality person. And I get that. Like some of you, you're like, I don't have really pretty stuff in my house. I don't even have a Pinterest account. Chip and Joanna Gaines would have a lot of work to do, I get that, but I think we have to understand that hospitality is not just whether or not you can put shiplap up in your house. Hospitality is the way that you show up in relationships. It's the way maybe you would host someone in your home, but also the way you would show up in a conversation about whether or not when you say to somebody, I'm gonna pray for you, you actually do pray for them and you follow up later to see how they're doing. You see if you can meet the needs of other people. You figure out how you can actually show them honor. That's what it means to be hospitable. And that kind of generosity in relationship, I think, is what Paul's pointing to, that if you want to serve one another at a big scale and at a small scale, hospitality and the idea of giving and contributing in relationships is so incredibly important. Which leads me back to the question I asked a few minutes ago. Describe the best party you've ever been to. On Church Online, Stephanie said, my wedding. That's good. That's really good. Mike on Eastern Hills Online said, my surprise 30th birthday. That's awesome. Ryan on YouTube said, just hanging out with friends on my birthday. And Heather on Facebook said, our wedding reception was the best. Everyone was on the dance floor all night. Isn't it amazing how those parties we can think back to, even the ones that weren't about us, right? If it's a birthday party or a wedding, whatever, and it was yours, you have some unique connection to it. But I especially love the parties that you show up to that you're just a guest at, but the host is so thoughtful, so detailed about everything each person would need that you feel personally cared for. That's the way we can show up in relationships too, whether we're throwing a party or not. I think that when we serve people and we show honor to people, we can actually kind of throw a party for them and make a moment for them in every interaction if we're being thoughtful about it. And I think that's easy to do, or at least easier to do with people we think very highly of, or people that we're concerned with what they think about us. But I think the question we have to ask if we want to be really serious about this is, how do you treat the people whose opinion has no impact on you? How do you treat people in your life where whether they like you or not is irrelevant? You think to yourself, I'll never see them again. I'll never meet them again. We don't have mutual friends. This is irrelevant. How do you treat them? I remember when I was in college, I worked as a caterer part-time to help ends meet. And I can tell you, working as a caterer in downtown Chicago, I got to serve some of the biggest athletes, some of the biggest entertainers, some of the biggest politicians in the country. And there were some of them that treated me incredibly kindly. It was amazing, actually. And then some of them, it was very clear that I was less than. There was some of them that was just obvious that I wasn't worth the time of day to them. And I could tell you who was who. Like to this day, it left an impression on me. The way we serve people that we don't need their positive opinion from is very important. What would it look like if I went and talked to the barista that you saw last week? How did you treat them? How did you serve them? How did you show them honor? What would it look like if I talked to the waiter or the waitress, the person at the DMV that you had to go talk to, your neighbor, the person that you cut off in traffic? How are we showing honor to other people? Because while we're talking about this idea that the one anothering we're supposed to be doing, loving one another and serving one another, is above and beyond for fellow followers of Jesus, that we're actually about to see this, like loving, applies to everyone. Because it's time to open for service. I know it's been easy. It's been easy to go, I'm just gonna go into survival mode. I'm just gonna do the bare minimum of what I need, of what our family needs. We just need to survive through this. But serving people, for the most part, it's free. It's not gonna affect your bank account. It's gonna affect your time. But what you'll discover when you begin to serve people is that there's a return on your investment you never anticipated. As a matter of fact, what we're gonna discover here on Independence Day weekend is that you have been given freedom to serve. Your freedom in Jesus actually has a purpose. The reason that you're experiencing freedom and that you're still alive on planet Earth as a follower of Jesus is for the sake of service. It's your calling. It's all of our calling. We're gonna see that in just a few minutes together. In the chat, I'd love for you to answer this question though. What is something you wanted but didn't end up needing? What is something you wanted but didn't end up needing? Maybe it was that gadget you were really excited about and now it's just collecting dust in a drawer. Maybe it was something you really wanted to have and now like it's just in the box still. What is something you wanted but didn't end up needing? Just a minute ago, we were in the book of Romans where Paul spends a whole bunch of time breaking down the message of the gospel, this hope that you and I can have in Jesus where we can have a restored relationship. We're gonna look at a letter to the church at Galatia, and this letter is kind of like a condensed version of Romans with a little bit of a unique context sprinkled on top. See, in Galatians, Paul is addressing a group of people called the Judaizers. And the Judaizers were a group of people that would go to those who were not ethnically Jewish, who were becoming followers of Jesus and say, great, glad you want to follow Jesus, follow all the stuff that he said. But if you really want to follow Jesus, you first have to become Jewish, follow the customs, traditions, and rules of Judaism on top of what Jesus said. But that's the opposite of what Jesus wanted to. He said that he came to fulfill the law so that you and I could place our faith and our trust in him, that by grace through faith we could know him. And so Paul wants to, as he's breaking this down, show them the freedom that they have, but he wants them to understand the purpose of their freedom. He didn't want them to trade one form of bondage in the law and following all these rules for a different form of bondage in license and getting away with whatever they wanted to, because it's really easy for that to become what we do. As a matter of fact, here we are, the 5th of July, Independence Day weekend. And you may not know this, but what we remember on the 4th of July is the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the day in which we reflect back on the moment where we left a tyrannical government and went out on our own. But here's the thing, the way that it often gets interpreted today is that I'm independent, that you're independent, that we're all on our own. But that's not what it means. As a matter of fact, if we think back to the first Independence Day, it was not about our individual independence. It was about our connected interdependence. Because if we were not interdependent with one another, we would have never come into being as a nation, good, bad, and ugly, all the things in between. We needed interdependence. And so my challenge to you, even today, on Independence Day weekend 2020, is to remember that as followers of Jesus, while it may be easy in our culture, in our setting, to get away with the idea of being on our own, being independent, doing it our own way, it's actually our interdependence with one another that gives us our strength. Paul says it this way in Galatians 5. He says, "For you were called to freedom, brothers. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed by one another." See, Paul wants to remind us of something really important here, and that is that when you and I misplace our freedom, when you forget the reason for your freedom and I forget the reason for my freedom, it becomes distorted to serve only my interests. All of a sudden, those sinful desires, those things that hurt me and hurt other people and hurt my connection to God, those become things I can indulge in over and over. A few months ago when we studied the book of Ephesians, Paul said this. He said that it's by grace you've been saved through faith, not as a result of your works, so that no one can boast. That you're actually God's workmanship, created in his image. And you know what? There is good works that he's created for you to do, that you would walk in them. He created them before you were ever born. If you want to know, what am I still doing here? Why am I still on planet Earth if the one day, someday is with God forever? The reason that you're still here, the reason that you still have a pulse is because God still has a plan for you to serve and to make a difference in the world around you. He repeats this thing that we've heard over and over again over the last few weeks. This idea that all these laws we talked about, all these laws that the Jewish people had followed for generation after generation after generation, all these laws, customs, and traditions that the Judaizers were trying to place on top of the first century Christians, all of those were fulfilled in this one idea, that you would love your neighbor as yourself. See, in their religious system, they had basically said, the way that I love God and the way that I love people are different. And I can be good with God even if I'm not good with people around me. But what Jesus would say and what Paul would repeat is that the way you and I love God, the way that we show we really do, is that we love his kids. That every person you and I interact with, not just followers of Jesus, every person, even people whose opinion doesn't count to us or doesn't matter to us, or people that we would do this with, they're created in the image of God with infinite dignity, value, and worth. And we love them as we love ourselves. And so if we want to fulfill the law, if we want to be aligned to what God wants, that's what it means. But he gives us one final warning. He says we need to make sure in how we serve one another that we don't nitpick, that we don't cut each other down, because all of a sudden we won't have anything left. Doesn't feel relevant at all for our day, does it? All of a sudden we find ourselves in a place where it's so easy, and I think it's always been easy, to say, I serve here and you don't serve that much. I serve this way and you don't really show up in the same way. And all of a sudden, it's easy, even for people that are more successful, or people that we see serving really well and making a difference, it's easy to cut them down and to come up with reasons to their face or behind their back or on social media for why they don't count, for what they're doing is irrelevant. And I would just say, be careful. Have you ever been to a restaurant where they have like the aquarium and you can pick your crabs and they're all in there? I don't eat crabs because I'm a humanitarian, but like maybe you have. I don't eat crabs because I'm a picky eater. But if you look really close when you're there at those crabs, you'll see they're trying to get out of the aquarium, and who can blame them, right? They're like, our friends are all leaving, and they don't come back, you know? And as you watch them try to get out of the aquarium, here's what happens. It's not that they're incapable, if they worked together, of making progress and maybe escaping. But they don't have to actually ever do anything because the crabs actually pull at one another. They pull each other down. And so if they work together, who knows what could happen, but they don't. They don't ever work together. They just pull each other down. And I think, unfortunately, far too often, when God looks at followers of Jesus and the way that we work to serve one another and to serve a watching world, we look pretty darn similar to that. We find ourselves frustrated. We find ourselves nitpicking. We find ourselves crabbing at one another. Just something to think about. I asked you a question a few minutes ago. What's something you wanted but didn't end up needing? Online, Jan said a new gaming computer in middle school. That's fun. Pete on Facebook said a huge bank account. I'm rich with family and this church. That's great. Jennifer on Facebook said the air fryer sitting on a shelf. David said, as a golfer, there was this new driver that I needed because I knew it would make me hit the golf ball further and straighter. Not so much. Yeah, if you find a golf club like that, let me know, okay? I need one too. Isn't it interesting how sometimes we have this picture in our head of what something can do for us, but then it falls short. We have this hope of what it can mean for us, but we forget the purpose that we originally got it for. You have been given freedom, and you need it. I need it. But our freedom has been given to us for a reason. Our freedom has been given to us that we would use it to serve others. And here's the thing, like so much of what we read about in the Bible from Jesus and the New Testament writers, that we're reading about something that is really not an option. It's not like you and I could serve or couldn't serve. We all serve. You're built to serve. The difference is just some of us are exclusively serving ourselves. So this idea of self-service is so easy to justify. It's what the world around us tells us we deserve. It's what we should do. But the kind of serving that we see Jesus model for us is the serving that gives without any expectation of return. It's a kind of service that says, my motivation is to genuinely help others. And so for some of you, the caution that I would give you is you're serving lots of people in lots of places in lots of ways, but the reason you're doing it is just for you. Can you serve somewhere and make a difference in the community without taking a selfie? Without telling people about it? Without getting credit? Or do you find yourself consumed with credit? Or do you find yourself consumed with this idea that the higher you get, the more prestige you get, the more honor you get, the more important you are? As a matter of fact, near the end of Jesus' ministry, he had two specific disciples, and these two disciples had a mom who was advocating with Jesus for her boys, which, nobody can blame her, but they had expected, like so many did, that Jesus would eventually overthrow the Roman Empire and establish an earthly kingdom. Now, what they would soon come to find out is that Jesus was there to reveal a heavenly kingdom, a kingdom that had no beginning and had no end, and invite you and me into it. But making this assumption that this was about an earthly kingdom, she says, can you have a place of honor for both of my boys? Can they be in your cabinet? Can they have a Secret Service detail? Can they have limos? That she wanted it to be special for her two boys. And we can criticize her, we can be frustrated, but I think, unfortunately, we're probably a lot closer to that than we want to admit. Are you more interested in celebrity or service? Online, are you more interested in people sharing your posts or in you sharing your life? It's so easy, isn't it? To think, I'm just gonna climb the ladder and get more success and get more notoriety and get more accolades. But Jesus is gonna show us that the ladder of leadership with him is a ladder that goes down to serve. As a matter of fact, the passage continues this way. It says, and when the other disciples heard it, they were indignant at the two brothers. But Jesus called them to him and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave. Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Look, for some of you, it's about recognizing that you've been pursuing perks and power and prestige. You've been pursuing celebrity when Jesus calls you to service, calls me to service. And you not only want to be this person, you want to have these kinds of people around you, especially if you've ever been on a sports team. You know the difference. One of my favorite movies growing up was the movie Rudy. Rudy is about a young guy who wants to play for the Notre Dame football team. But he's not really big enough, he's not really strong enough, he's not really good enough to be able to make the team. But over the course of the movie, it's a true story. You watch him go to junior college, and then he finally gets into Notre Dame, and he's on the practice squad just out of this really incredible servant's heart, this effort that he's willing to put in. And then eventually at the end of the movie, he gets to be on the field and actually play. And if you just watch the end of the story, you think that's a great story. And maybe it was talent that got him there. Maybe it was skill that got him there, but it was really service that got him there. He had this attitude that great teammates on teams always have, and the attitude is this attitude that says, put me in, coach. Wherever you need me, whatever you need me to do, however you need me to help, it's not about my success, it's about our success. It's about the team. And it's so important that you and I understand we're on a team together. If you're a follower of Jesus, this idea of one another, this idea of interdependence, this connection that we have, it works the same way. So here's what I'd love for you to do. Some of you, God is going to challenge you to just take a step right now. And so normally I have to say, would you take out your phone? But a lot of you have already done that. If you haven't, though, grab your phone And here's what I'd like you to do. If God's challenging you to take this step, email the email address serve@ehills.org and put in the subject line, put me in, coach. If you'll do that, somebody will follow up with you and let you know what opportunities are coming up as we kind of fill back in our bench, as things start to open back up and people start coming back. It doesn't mean that you're getting signed up for something next week. It's not a required thing, but if God's calling you to get off the bench and to serve, yeah, you could wait. But what is God asking you to do? Just send that email right now. Now, that is the easy part. I mean, maybe you're not ready to do it yet. I hope you are. Here's the hard part. Here's the question I'd love for you to answer as we head back to singing together in the next few minutes. How will you serve someone this week? How will you serve someone specifically this week? Last week we were talking about loving one another, and I said there's probably somebody, as I've been talking about, that's difficult for you to love, and you feel like God's putting some pressure on you, that's exactly who he wants you to love this week. Serving is so practical, it's so specific. Maybe there's somebody that you feel like has been taking you for granted. Maybe there's somebody you've been taking for granted. And God's just been reminding you of that person's name, or he's been putting that person's face on your mind to be able to do something specifically for this week. Just drop that even in the chat over the next few minutes so we can be praying for you about it this week. Before we get back to singing together, would you pray with me? God, thank you. Thank you that we were made on purpose and for a purpose. And the reason for those of us who are followers of Jesus that we are still here, central to this plan that you have for us, is that we would serve one another. And God, as we've been looking in Romans 12, I'm just reminded of how easy it is as living sacrifices to take ourselves off of the altar of following you. And I pray that over the next few minutes, God, just at our heart level, we would place ourselves back on the altar of submission to your plan, to your will, to your way for our life. That we would be reminded it's the way we were designed to live. Help us, God, in a world that desperately, desperately, desperately wants to serve itself and wants us to make our own priority the same, to see the better way you challenge us to live today. In Jesus' name, amen. Would you stand and sing with us?